I'm sorry, you're not taking this. God.
I moved for
She may be looking for a parking place.
yeah, there was a couple. It's not fun.
I didn't take one.
Yeah.
No, I mean, there is no parking places there. All of the, all wood spaces are full,
Are
were
they?
full when I got them.
Uh-oh.
That's okay.
Yeah. My car isn't in one of them, so.
Yeah, there's a car that's like. So I'll just, let's see. Hi. I think we're gonna hold off just for a minute. I know. Welcome everyone to this special board meeting of the Granville Exempted Village School District. My brain has just broken for a minute. Okay, great. We are going to do the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's the extra table, you guys, 2 tables. So again, welcome. And would you take the roll, please, Mr. Yule?
Ms. Shaw.
Here.
Mr. Crum.
Here.
Ms. Eads. Here. Ms. Bullheim.
Here.
Mr. Wolf.
Here.
Great. Okay. So yeah, we're here for a special taxation policy discussion. I'm going to turn it all over to Mr. Brown, unless you would like me to turn it
And I'm gonna
directly
turn it
to.
over to Brittany.
Okay,
to
and I will
talk-
turn it-
Introduce to David. Turn it over to hot potato, right here.
So we have David Conley with us from Rockville Financial. He is going to be facilitating a taxation policy discussion for us starting tonight over a series of 5 or 6 or so meetings. So I will let him take it from here.
Great, good evening. It's nice to see you all. It seems like just a little week since I was here previously. So just a few things to kind of housekeeping wise. I have several slides that have rather small numbers on them. So between the printed document and there, we might be going back and forth or kind of position your chair where you can see the screen a little better. And this is also not so much a meeting or a presentation as it is an interactive process. So at any point as we're going through this, anytime at all you have a thought or a question, put it out there, because we're undertaking a process right now where only about 5% of governments in Ohio have actually started doing this. So this is a very new undertaking that's been driven by a lot of changes in attitudes relative to taxes. So this process is new, and you all are some of the very first people to go through this. My responsibility is to provide information that can help you all formulate your own policy about how you would approach taxation here in the community. The policy is your policy, not my policy. My opinions and ideas are just my opinions and ideas. Ultimately, it's what you all think is important for your community. The policy is really designed to do two things. The first is to leave some kind of a written guideline for future boards and future administrators to be able to follow, so that when someone else new is sitting in your seat, they don't have to guess about what your intent was relative to taxing. And you all have had some experiences where you've gone through a number of different types of efforts. This is really a nice way to leave behind some guidance for that. The other is to provide some transparency for the community, to understand your rationale about your approach to taxation and your rationale and reasoning behind that. Before I begin, I know in our first meeting I gave you a little bit of background on myself. I am the president of Rockmill Financial. This is my 37th year working with governments across Ohio. That's all I've ever done. I've always worked with governments in the area of finance and taxation. So I have lots of governmental clients. Last count, about 140 school clients, 400 governments total, so a vast array of clients. I tell people I'm not necessarily smart, but I am experienced. So I've seen almost anything you can think of. It's pretty amazing. So I bring to the table just a long history of seeing some unique circumstances that help me pull things together. In the last few years, I've been spending time working with school districts in particular to look at sustainability plans, which has evolved into a taxation policy. But I also do a host of other financial advisory type of responsibilities for my clients. Okay, so as it pertains to you all in the community, I want to go over sort of my key responsibilities for the group. The first and foremost is to provide research, and tonight we're going to go through a lot of data. You see that in the handouts, primarily to give you a basis of understanding of who Granville is today and how it's changed over the last 30 years. Part of having a really good taxation policy is not only looking at where you are right now, but trying to predict what the community might look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and so on. Because you'll be making some decisions, and you have recently, that have an impact on the community today. But the question is, what will the impact be 10 years from now and 30 years from now? It might strike you as strange that your tax system has been in place, notwithstanding the income taxes, for the last 100 years. But ask yourself the question, has the community changed over that time frame? And so we've been using, and this is really at the heart of what's been happening at the state with tax reform and with the constitutional amendment efforts, and that is governments to a degree have somewhat lost touch with how our taxing structure is impacting the people that has to pay those taxes. So this whole process is getting my job is to help you get your hands around where you are, where you might be going, and then provide some analysis for you so that you can begin to make some decisions as it pertains to the next levy and the next levy and the next levy and so on and so forth. Once we get through that, I'll begin to provide you with options related to how your current tax structure is in effect and how you might augment that over time with other structures that could prove to be more beneficial to the community. When we get to the end of this process, usually about the fourth meeting, my job is solely facilitating. So I'll pose some questions tonight, but you don't have to answer those questions. Tonight is just, you just sit and listen. I'm intending to have you really start thinking about how certain parts of this whole thing should come together. But at the very end, I'll facilitate discussion with you all and begin to document your views and opinions about how the tax system should operate within this community and who should carry the burden of paying those taxes. And then I'll draft the policy on screen, so we'll bring the policy up, start putting in the things that are most important to you, and then we'll finalize that by the fifth or sixth meeting. So that's sort of my responsibilities leading into this process. Any questions so far on that whole thing? So I'm going to apologize. This is a 2-hour presentation that we're going to get done in an hour and a half, an hour and 25 minutes. All right, so let's start with, what is the tax policy?
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
I don't understand it. So you've got the board here, I just want to make sure you know you also have some community experts from our finance committee.
Yes, so
Okay,
Paul,
good.
I've known for
Great.
Yeah.
a long time. I met
I introduced myself
Okay,
real quick.
okay.
Scott Lofton.
Scott, David Couple.
I'm with the district.
Yeah, no, I recognize you. Yeah. So-
Sorry, not you.
No, I appreciate it, yeah, so, and again, at any time, just jump right in. So, as I mentioned, tax policies are fairly new. Just think about this for a second. We have policies for everything, almost, even cell phone policies or mobile device policy, but governments have never written policies about their thoughts and approaches to taxing. So this is a rough idea. The key part of a tax policy is that the goal is to take your views and philosophies and put them into something in writing. So there is a document that people can reference as to your approach to taxation. But basically, we want to set outlines that will kind of indicate what your behaviors will be given certain circumstances in the community. You know, for example, there's a development that comes. It brings houses, students come, those students need a new school building. What's the best way to approach raising the taxes to finance that school building? And what steps would you go through to say, okay, this is the best approach or that? But the goal here is to have something in writing. I like to use the example that, and I should say that this community and the district has done incredibly well over the years. Your approach to how you've managed the school district financially, the types of taxes you've used are all incredibly well done. It's sort of like grandma's apple pie. It's delicious. The problem is once grandma moves along, if she didn't write the recipe down, it's kind of hard to replicate, you know, that apple pie. So that's one of the key reasons for having the tax policy. Typically the objectives, now this doesn't have to be solely your objectives, these are just sort of the general objectives. The key is to look at what's happening with state law changes. We have this constitutional amendment which, you know, being able to navigate that at the end of the day might require some interesting dynamics. But we have state law changes that are in front of us. We have potential constitutional amendments. The other thing that you have happening is that your community is changing. The demographics of your community is changing. As your community changes, the question is, what are we going to do to make sure we're taxing people in an appropriate way? So one of the key factors would be, first, given tax law change, how can we continue to receive income that allows the district to be sustainable? What I mean by sustainable is simply, can we go 30 years without coming back to the voters for new taxes, for any purpose, whether that be buildings, operations, maintenance? The next is, when we do come back to the voters for levies, should we try to make sure that the type of tax we use is fair and balanced for those people that have to pay those taxes, both today and down the road? And I like to use the example when it comes to fair and balanced, it's kind of hard to define fair and balanced. It's a matter of opinion. And I've been in a number of meetings where I've talked to communities and said, you know, this very point, you know, in this, especially in Granville, you have neighborhoods where houses side by side are similar, the value of those homes are similar. And when you look at using a property tax, let's assume that tax would cost that homeowner $500 a year. You have two houses side by side. One home has a person who's 70 years old, who's a widow, doesn't use the schools anymore because their kids and grandkids have moved away. The home right next door has a married couple with 3 young children using the schools. Is it fair that the person that's widowed pays the same amount as the person living in the house next door? You don't have to answer that question, but it gets to the point of when you use a property tax, that's exactly the scenario you create when you have diversity in the people that are paying taxes in the community. And should that be something that you take into consideration when it's time to levy another tax, whether that's a property tax or an income tax? So one of the key objectives is to really focus on how this community is shifting and what is the burden on those taxpayers. So any questions about the overall objectives and goals? All right, so determinations to be made. We're going to be deciding a whole host of things as we go along, and I should say you all will be making these decisions. And these are questions that you may have an answer to today and you may not have an answer to today, but I'll sort of go through each one of them and sort of get the wheels turning. The first is, what are the best use of taxes in this community? And in a couple of slides, I'll talk to you about a well-structured tax system. But there are a multitude of uses of taxes, not types of taxes, but uses, how you intend to use those taxes for the future. And that will play in heavily into the process of deciding what type of tax to use. When should new taxes be requested? And that varies from treasurer to treasurer, superintendent to superintendent. The challenge is that I've worked with enough districts where one treasurer might decide that they need an operating levy 2 to 3 years before another treasurer would make the same decision. Would it make sense to try to put together some type of clear-cut indication as to what would be the best time to put a new levy on for whatever the purpose might be? So thinking about when a new tax should be requested. The third thing, what is the district's definition of value? And I've got some slides in here that will get to the heart of this issue of value. And if I have to add this commentary, back to the reason that we're dealing with tax concerns today, not just here, but across the state, is that taxpayers have really been disconnected from what they receive in value for the taxes they pay. And I've been in a lot of meetings where, with the state constitution conversation, like if you eliminate property taxes, there goes your fire station, your fire protection and your police protection and all these things. And some people are like, oh wow, geez, I never thought about that. I never thought about what I lose if I don't pay. I don't see that as a problem, as a taxpayer fault. I see that as a government fault where we have not necessarily been effective at making sure that people that are paying for services really understand the value of those services that they've been paying for. Because I'm sure most of us, when we go to the store, when we pay for something, we're hoping to get something of value in return for that. But value can be judged a number of different ways, and we'll talk about kind of what ways to value that. And you all, when we get to the very end of this process, I'll ask you the question by meeting number 5, what is your value proposition? Do we have a particular target for quantity of services, quality of services? Because there's a direct correlation between the quality of service you provide and the cost to provide that service. So if you're going to be more expensive, hopefully that a taxpayer will say, well, we're getting quality, quantity, whatever the case may be. And our homework assignment today will be for you all to come back next week with your thoughts about what your value proposition would be for your taxpayers. But it directly ties to our policy. Once you know what your value proposition is, once you know the quality of what you're producing and providing to residents, then it's easier to say, this is the value, this is the cost that we should expect people to pay for that service. So we'll also in the policy begin to identify what would be kind of the price range, if you will, for what you're delivering. How many times have you thought about that? How many times has any government actually thought, let me try to equate the value of what I'm providing with the cost of those services? Typically, it's just simply, we need more money to do what we need to do. This is changing the entire mindset around the approach to taxing and what residents can expect from you from the future in terms of how they know how you're going to approach that. We talked about this a little bit before. What type of taxes should we use? Currently, you're using a traditional income tax and property taxes to operate the school district. The question is are those two type of taxes the best structure for the district going forward, or is there a better structure for the district going forward for various reasons? And largely that has to deal with who's going to be paying those taxes as you go down the road. Then we get to the point of, let's make sure we have some benchmarks, things that we can target so that we know what the evolution of our universe is, and make sure that the policy and your behaviors are in line with how things might be changing in the universe of benchmarks. So we'll begin talking about some of the benchmarks today. Let's see. The next part of the conversation will be developing some goals around how long you should try to go between tax levies. And today, there's not necessarily any type of written approach to that. And it's changed a lot over the years. Some districts historically had a 3-year cycle, or a 5-year cycle, or a 10-year cycle. The purpose of a policy is to actually say, we will make our best efforts to go 10 years, if possible, without a new levy, or 20 years, or even 30 years. But put it in writing, it gives the administration some direction for how efficient to try to operate the district. Not that they don't operate efficiently today, but it adds an extra layer of guidance. What's a reasonable amount to keep in your operating and capital balances? So I know today you guys have, Brittany, do you have a formal policy for your minimum and maximum? So you're a rare government. I won't just say school district. You're a rare government to have both a minimum and a maximum. One of the challenges that school districts ran into this year was that the state legislature tried to establish for you what your maximum fund balance should be, without any understanding whatsoever of who you are as an operating entity, or frankly, how school districts vary from place to place. Some school districts require significantly more money to operate, others require significantly less. We'll go through a process. I'll show you sort of the quantitative approach to valuing the minimum and the maximum. That'll be independent of Brittany's, and hopefully we'll be somewhat close to one another when it's all said and done. But the goal is to have something that is a defensible calculation for both numbers, so that when the Budget Commission sees your balances, now today I don't think you're going to have any concerns with that, but at some point in the future you may. When the Budget Commission says, we think you have too much money, you could say, well, this is our approach to calculating what is too much, what is yours? And it'll make it a little more challenging for them to put you on the spot about what is or isn't too much money. And then we'll sort of kick that around and make sure that we have a system in place that allows us to make adjustments to those numbers year over year, because as I mentioned before, things don't stay the same from one year to the next in any community. And what might make sense today may not make sense 2 years from now. So having some systems in place for that. The next item down, how much support should be given to tax incentive proposals? And I know that Mr. Brown mentioned last week, or the last time we were here, that there's some proposals out there. School districts will, from time to time, find themselves with their back against the wall when presented with some type of tax incentive for economic development purposes. And probably better than half of the time, those school districts get pushed into agreeing to something that is not in the best interest of their taxpayers. And 99% of the time, those school districts have no policies or rules or guidelines around how they should approach incentive proposals. One of the things our policy should have in it and lay out perfectly clear is how you will interact relative to any type of proposal that requires school board approval. There are some that you won't have any jurisdiction or power over. It doesn't necessarily mean you still are blocked from negotiating, which is another part of this that matters. I have a fair number of school clients that have been successful, even with proposals where it didn't require board approval, still negotiating payments from the companies that were benefiting from the tax incentives. So some language around that is very, very helpful when it comes to negotiating. One of the things I like to point out is that in a community that's starting to change or grow, often the incentives themselves, when you really boil it down, are taxpayer dollars being redirected to other purposes. Depending on the type of development, those taxpayer dollars that are being directed to other purposes will come back to haunt your existing taxpayers, where they will have to make up potentially the lost revenue that was used to support economic development. So having some well thought out views about, is it your responsibility, for example? And I love to ask this question when we get to that topic, but is it your responsibility to support economic development as a school board? You don't have to answer that question, but that's one that you will have to answer when it comes to the tax policy. And it's not an easy question to answer, so we'll move down there.
David, just to give you a little context, right before this meeting, I was in the CIC meeting, the Community Improvement Corporation, that was newly formed to try and spur economic development, especially for the established JED area. And, as I mentioned in the last meeting, the Village of Granville is also developing a fiscal strategy. I think they're both wanting to participate in this process with us and in collaboration so that everything aligns, so that when a developer comes in, they kind of understand the rule of the game. And if we have that in a pre-established type of format that's been well thought out and the strategy is articulated in that document, the likelihood of us being in a position that we are taken advantage of and or make a poor decision in the best interest of the taxpayers is lower. So they are all very aware of what conversation is happening right now. They're very eager to make sure that whatever they do as a CIC supports the school district's perspective on economic development. So just understand that that's already occurring.
Yeah, that would put you ahead of a lot of communities. I work with a school district in the northwest part of the state that the city came to the school board and said that we have a large manufacturing concern that will be building a factory in the school district. We've negotiated all the terms with this developer, with this company. The state of Ohio has signed off on it. And we need you to sign this agreement. You're going to get a couple $100,000 a year as a payment agreement with this particular company, but they need an answer from you right away. So the school board had to call a quick meeting. They approved this agreement for a couple $100,000 a year. It turns out after they agreed to it, the company was a very large manufacturer who was building a $700 million facility where the tax revenue would have been well above $3 million a year to the school district. And they called me after the fact and said, can we renegotiate this? And we subsequently were on the ballot for a bond issue to build a new high school, which we could have done without taxes had we had an opportunity to negotiate with them. But the point of that story is that they were boxed into a corner and forced to agree to something, because if they had said no, then, the school board caused us to lose the opportunity to create 200 jobs and all this economic development activity without ever really knowing who the company was. It turns out when everything was said and done, the company hadn't even purchased the land yet to build the facility. So the importance of having some type of guidelines, hello, how are you? Of having some type of guidelines really, really helps, really matters. So I'm going to turn pages a little bit. We're going to focus on developing a pretty well-structured tax system. And I wanted to talk about the use of taxes. What are the best, what are the most common uses of taxes? And ultimately get into what types of taxes tend to work best for those. But in three categories, usually a tax system or a government that has a tax structure that funds operations, maintenance, and large capital items independently. So not using operating money for the purposes of maintaining the school district or maintenance of the buildings and or large capital items is really important. You can use property and income taxes for operations, either or, and you currently do. Out of curiosity, Brittany, you guys have a PI levy?
Inside village.
Inside village. Do you use any of your operating money to support capital?
Yes.
Okay.
We do transfers to capital projects.
Okay. So I always sort of point this out. You'd be surprised that most school districts in Ohio do not have permanent, very specific permanent improvement money. Usually they're subsidizing their maintenance and some capital items out of their operating money. So, no, this is a real question. Is that or is that not a good idea?
I imagine it's not a good idea.
Not a good idea. If you're using money from your operating fund to buy school buses and to do other kinds of things, that's less money to pay your school teachers. And that very quickly pushes you back to voters for the next operating levy. To the extent you're subsidizing anything from your general fund, it accelerates the time period between operating levies. So in a well-structured tax system, it's a good idea to try to have as much of your maintenance, ongoing maintenance needs as possible funded independently from your operating tax dollars. It also helps in that circumstance to have some idea around your long-term maintenance needs, your major maintenance needs, so roof repairs, HVAC, things of that nature, so that you can figure out whether or not in your particular tax structure is the income coming in from that inside millage, for example, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but how much do you think that brings in a year again?
It's like a little over 2 million.
So $2 million a year. So the question is $2 million a year for the next 30 years enough to maintain all of your existing buildings plus any additional, it isn't just buildings, it's parking, lots, it's, all the HVAC, all those things. Would $2 million a year be sufficient for your current footprint to be able to do that for the next 30 years? Chances are it isn't. You spend most of that right now?
To that?
Yeah. Well, and,
No.
What's the answer?
The answer is no.
well, and especially if you have gotten yourself into a position of deferred maintenance because you didn't have adequate revenue coming in previously. So again, you have to, that's part of that history lesson of how did we get where we're at. Part of that is when you're just maintaining operational dollars at a minimum, and you don't have a generating revenue stream to take care of or capital projects, you defer maintenance. And that, at some point, that bill comes due.
It does.
Yeah.
So the intermediate school, I did that transaction there. I have to imagine that it's, the challenge with deferred maintenance is it's twofold. That the longer you wait, more things break, and then those things become more expensive. So you have more things breaking that are more expensive every single year, and it starts to put pressure on the operating sustainability. So again, back to this idea of what's the best possible way to structure your taxing system where once it's in place, you can go the longest period of time without having to go back to your taxpayer. But I would have to guess that maintenance will slowly but surely start to put pressure, a lot of pressure on the way that things are going here, notwithstanding the operational needs of the district. Maintenance can also be addressed through either property taxes or income taxes. You all have done something, I'll get to the tax structure in just a second, but you did do something that is more beneficial from a maintenance perspective than just having a standalone permanent improvement levy. And that is you all were moved inside millage to permanent improvement. And in a second, I'll talk to you about why that's a good thing. The last one is large capital items, and that tends to be school buildings, or bus garages, or athletic facilities. Athletic facilities seem to be the in thing right now. I'm doing lots of work with indoor, multi-purpose athletic facilities, but they become an important part of this whole concept of value. And we'll talk about how people perceive their school district compared to other school districts, because they visit other schools to compete for different sporting events and other activities. They begin to develop a frame of reference for what is sort of in vogue for the amenities of a particular district. And it can provide, it provides insight, but it also can put pressure on you from a value proposition. The question is, how much space do you have in your tax system to potentially tackle the number of large capital items that might need to be tackled down the road? And when I get into the cost structure of that in a second, it'll start to become a little more clear as to why it's important to really think about it. But ultimately, it plays a role in the system. When you look at a particular government that doesn't have any debt outstanding, so typically bonds are outstanding for anywhere from 25 to 37 years, depending on when the debt was originally issued. Once that debt is paid off, it's a pretty good sign that whatever asset was built with that financing is at the end of its life, or I mean, unless it was built back in 1930 where it would last forever. But anything built in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, the life expectancy, it just doesn't have the same longevity. Usually that points to the need for additional financing to add to the picture, and it becomes a necessary part of the system overall. So ultimately, when you get to the policy, we'll be talking about, is it appropriate to try to have a system that balances those things out among them? So any questions on that part at all? Paul, you have any thoughts? Let's move to your tax system. Today, I am not going to go through this in detail, so I'll save the detail for our next meeting. But this is a nice visual of the taxes that you have in place today and generally sort of how they work. I'll find my mouse here. So I will point out anything in the blue. These are all taxes that are property tax in nature, and they're designed to go to the general fund for operating purposes. So the blue would be your operating taxes, the first thing on the list. These are all property taxes. The first one is your inside millage. Inside millage is a tax that's not voted on by your taxpayers. That's a tax that's, in essence, assigned, the structure of the tax is assigned to you through the Constitution, and then additionally allocated out to the school districts based on a 10 mil maximum of overlapping subdivisions. But we're not going to go into that detail. Just know that this 2.45 and the tax down here at the 275 are both one tax, and that is your inside millage. The board at some point made a decision. How long ago was that for you?
2018 when they passed the
Okay.
tax.
Made a decision that you needed some money for maintenance purposes. So the district shifted part of that inside millage down here into the green for your maintenance purposes. So that's bringing in the $2 million a year. So the first thing that I mentioned, focusing on that is a key thing. The first is that someone had their head up enough to say we need specific money for maintenance purposes. The second thing that's important is that you'll notice there's this column that says voted rate. Voted rate is, in theory, the rate at which voters would have approved the tax. In your case, for inside millage, it's just the rate that's been allocated to you. But when a tax is voted and is subject to reduction over time, you'll notice that the voter rate, let's just pick one for the fun of it, the 2013 current expense levy was voted at 5.5 mils, and it's now effective at 3.28 mils. So the reduction factor is in effect. For those, I know that most of you understand this idea, but I want to make sure that for those listening, they understand. Ohio put in place a rule to try to protect taxpayers from paying more in taxes as their home went up in value. The way that system has worked is that, for example, if you were a taxpayer and you voted for this 5.5 mil levy and it cost you $1,000 a year for that, the next year when your home went up in value, you didn't have to pay $1,200. Instead, you still only paid $1,000. But the county, in order to make sure you paid $1,000, adjusted the tax rate down so that the lower tax rate with the higher dollar value of the house produced the same amount in taxes. That's true for all of your taxes that are in effect for your operations, with the exception of the inside millage. The inside millage is always just that millage rate. So you'll notice this says 2.45. And class 1 represents your individuals. Class 2 would be businesses. I just break it down where it's really simple. Class 1 people, class 2 businesses. But you'll notice that rate, these two columns show the rate at which those taxes are currently applied. So your inside millage is always going to be 2.45. As homes go up in value, they will pay 2.45 mils against the higher value, except now that number is, the increase in home values has been capped, so it won't be able to go up as much as it did during the period of time where reappraisals were causing home values to go up. Outside of that, everywhere you see the yes, the Y, the value of income that comes in from those taxes never changes. So that $1,000 a year is always $1,000 a year. And I was in a meeting the other day where someone said, well, Dave, it looks like we're on fixed income then. And the answer is, yep, you are on fixed income. Your school district is on fixed income. All of this blue that's coming in for operating, with the exception of this little bitty 2.45 mil levy, stays flat every single year. And the tax rate goes down as values go up, but your income never changes. So if your income is never changing and you're on a fixed income, but your expenses are changing year over year, the two ultimately lead you to need additional income. So one of the key factors that supports you being sustainable is how do you get your fixed income to become something that changes and grows with inflation over time. And that's something we'll talk about. There's two ways to do that. But this is all driven by this other part 2 of your inside millage coming down to your permanent improvement money. Inside millage never gets reduced. It always stays the same. As homes go up in value, so does the revenue from that tax. So for your permanent improvement levy, most districts that have a permanent improvement levy, if they pass one that brings in $2 million a year, it stays at $2 million a year. Your case, you're bringing in $2 million a year, and it gets to grow as your values grow over time. So that's also a positive, simply because you moved inside millage down for the purposes of maintenance as opposed to passing a separate permanent improvement levy. So you've got...
Could the board choose to move more inside millage to permanent improvement funds?
Absolutely.
So we
Yep.
could move their full amount of current.
You could move the full amount. You could turn that inside millage, you could take...
Instead of funding the capital
project fund with operating expenses at some point could be part of a strategy.
Yep. And so one of
And that 5% total is always going to be the same and doesn't have any opportunity to move in terms of the inside millage, or that 2.45 and the 2.75 together? How is that determined? And
Well, I'm sorry.
That's, he's talking about the total amount of inside millage
Yeah.
should not change,
It will not, well,
That was-
in theory.
it may change. It shouldn't change, but it may change. The current, so with tax reform, the State Budget Commission has been given some authority that they already have, but somehow they thought they needed to make it more clear. If the County Budget Commission ever viewed your fund balances as being excessive, too much, they have the power to change your tax structure. They can reduce taxes that are in effect, including reducing your inside millage, which they had the power to do in the past. So they have the ability to take that 2.45 mils and give it to another one of your overlapping subdivisions, such as the village, if they felt like the village could benefit from having your inside millage and that you had too much money. Back to one of the reasons to have a policy about these things, and through this process talk about strategy in terms of what really makes good sense long term. If you check the boxes, there's two types of taxes that work great for maintenance. Inside millage that are moved down for maintenance purposes, or an income tax. The two of those will grow over time and hopefully will help you continue to stay ahead of your future maintenance needs, as long as those things currently meet the need. So if you have deferred maintenance and if your need is $3 million a year and you only have $2 million a year, it'll help chip away at it, but you're constantly going to be falling behind on your capital maintenance needs. So part of our work will be when we get to the part of this conversation in meeting number 3, where we talk about options. What are the advantages, for example, of taking the 2.45 mils and dropping it down to the 2.75? As it stands today, the state has not outlawed moving inside millage. I'm pretty sure that's right, Paul, right? So you don't have to worry about currently. That at one point it was on the radar where they wanted to block school districts from doing that. But if you begin to lower how many taxes are in this category, when you add these up, there's this thing called the 20 mil floor. And Brittany, have you gone through the 20 mil floor a little bit with them? The 20 mil floor is that magic minimum tax rate where once you reach 20, these taxes stop being reduced. So your income will begin to grow again as home values grow. Except that the home values won't be growing by 30% anymore. They'll be growing by 3 to 5%, which is still better than zero. So starting there. But if you start to remove some of these taxes that are added into the 20 mil floor, you get closer to the 20 mil floor and maybe ultimately reach the 20 mil floor, assuming it doesn't, through legislation, doesn't change. So strategically speaking, One advantage of moving inside millage is to get you closer to the 20 mil floor from an operating perspective.
You said something about that values wouldn't be increasing by 30% anymore, that it would be reduced by
So one of the things that was really problematic when the state, all right, this is a quick snapshot. These are your property values looking down.
While you're looking for that, I'm just gonna throw this out here too. For whatever reason, the library levies count towards our 20 mil floor value as well, and they just passed an extra quarter mil, so that bumps us up a little bit higher. So our actual 20 mil floor rate is 26.2. So we
Okay,
do have to factor it.
okay.
I was wondering where that extra mil came in, because I just did the math on my house.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be it.
Right, so the question about the property values, this is your residential valuation right here. And, we went from 500 million and went through a reappraisal, and those values went to 659 and then 672. And that was a result of the market sort of catching up to the home values being depressed. For school districts, not for you all, but for school districts that were at that guaranteed 20 mil tax rate, when values went up like that, homeowners saw pretty significant increases in their property taxes. So the state lawmakers decided they want to implement and have implemented a rule that limits the increase from one cycle to the other to the rate of inflation.
That was just last year. They did that a couple years ago.
Yeah, so like November. And so you will not see valuation increases like this for tax purposes that would have some impact, so we're going to have some caps there. But going back to this issue of sustainability, and so you have the library that's added into this number here. Strategically, back to the thought though of you have only a few things available to you to get you to a point of income that will grow over time. The 20 mil floor, to the extent it exists, in some form of an income tax. So, either we find a way to get the library to do something different with their tax structure, or we look at the potential. Tonight's not the night for that, but the potential for, if you move 2.45 mils to your inside millage and potentially converting some of your existing property taxes into an additional income tax. So I have school districts right now that are on the ballot with the sole purpose of replacing existing property taxes with income taxes, and more specifically earned income taxes, because many of their residents are on fixed income, and the property taxes are having a punitive impact on those homeowners versus the way that an earned income tax would impact them. I am not suggesting that. I'm just saying these are the things that this process is all about, because we may come to the end of this and you say we're going to leave everything the way that it is, but it's not without first going through the pros and cons of how all of this would come together.
Still can't have both an earned
Yeah,
and
that's-
traditional base at the same time, though?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, so because we have the traditional, we can add on an earned.
You would have to convert to an earned, correct, yeah.
Which I mean, we're not making decisions tonight.
Right, yeah, tonight is no decisions. So our third meeting is an in-depth dive into the types of income taxes that exist, who pays them, how it impacts them over time, and if there was a desire to convert from one to the other, what that process requires, so that you have a full understanding. Now, understanding your history, where you started with an earned income tax, and then came back to a traditional income tax.
That we heard from the community, I still remember sitting right here, and there were like people lined up against that wall, and they said, listen, lower the rate and make everyone pay, because 1.25 is too much for the earned income owner or income tax people, so lower the rate and make everyone pay. And the rationale was, for the most part, our seniors are not your typical seniors. They actually generate quite a bit of revenue. And so there was a statistical aspect to that conversation that said, hey, the average senior is making more than the typical in the state.
Yeah.
And therefore, let's spread it out so that everyone can pay less. So 0.75 is doable, and that was the conversation. So codifying that conversation into this policy is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Because if you want to change that, that's fine, but know what you're doing in the process.
Exactly.
And so I think that was a really, I mean, it was an aha moment for the entire board, because we thought we would hear something completely different from the community and from our seniors. And ultimately, you know, by lowering the rate, the seniors said yes. And I think that was a powerful moment in this community, so making sure that it's
It's hard
referenced.
to know how well people truly understood that.
Right.
But I think there's a really important factor like gathering data, both historically as well as current, as well as figuring out how to project what that earned versus unearned income mix is. And unfortunately, it's hard to get that data.
Well, it's
but-
actually about 50. That is the only level of detail that we get,
Right.
and so it's about 50
That's a really
to 50.
important number, right? That's a super important number. And re-educating people as potential options are thrown out there about the implications of one versus the other are going to be important. Again, like you said, Jeff, to kind of codify the plan and kind of outline.
Yeah,
So project a little bit how the community might change and how that.
And the beauty of this work is that we will be able to at least say, you know, understanding what the mix in the community would be, and that that as a policy matter, the board would opt to use one or the other depending on how the community would continue to change for the future. We clearly have some momentum with the traditional, but we've got my demographic table, which we'll get to at the last slide, is 1 in a million. I mean, first time I saw your data, I'm like, I had to shake my head because it's really unusual, but a good unusual. But back to your tax structure, we have, so you have money that we know for permanent improvement maintenance purposes is good to have. It is most likely insufficient for the long term, but that's a decision to be made. You have a bond issue that's currently collecting 3.4 mils in property taxes. That bond issue is paid off in 2031. So imagining that, let's just say nothing changes in your tax values between now and then, in 2032, your property taxes will go down by 3.4 mils, or potentially stay the same if you opt to do a new bond issue that would require the same. But it creates for us the opportunity to talk about what is good policy around the payoff of an existing debt. I have some school clients that see that as an opportunity to do something else that would be a no increase in tax type of a transaction, which I believe we've done here years ago. But it will be something that we'll be talking about in the third meeting. And then we have the traditional income tax. Overall, your community has been really supportive of the school district. You have a 67% passage rate. This is your election history going back to 1985. And I included in here the income tax levy. So whenever you see the percentage sign, that would be an income tax attempt. The original one, so this is 23 all the way down to 85. The millage and or the rate for the income tax. So this was the earned income tax back in 18. And yeah, so that went down pretty soundly. And then you came back, we're successful at 51%. The renewal down at 42, and then again a pass at 54%. So, but by and large, the community has been fairly supportive for both renewals and for new money levies. More recently, in the last 5 to 10 years, we're seeing more and more districts struggle with getting renewals passed, generally speaking, and that's for income taxes and property taxes. The statewide trend is not good for renewal levies. That's largely just general attitude about taxes. Now, I do this every day all over the state, and I am finding myself in more and more meetings where there are 20 people in the audience where a year ago, they didn't think their taxes were too high. And simply because the headlines keep telling them their taxes are too high, they now feel like their taxes are too high. It's sort of like, oh, maybe I should be more concerned about my taxes simply because other people are saying their taxes are too high. But the reality is that attitudes matter, and how people perceive what you're doing is really critical to your success for the future. Now, I took a look at sort of the trend line. The blue line would represent the percentage for or against each of your levy requests, and then I layered a trend line on top of that to get a sense for whether or not over time people are more or less supportive of your levies. And that says everything, no library. So the library, I took them out of this data because people usually support the library for some reason. Well, their millage isn't very much. But your voter support is actually growing over time. This is also unusual. 90% of these that I'm doing, the line is going in the opposite direction. And it matters because if you have a line that's going in the opposite direction and there's needs for operating the district in the near term and other circumstances are moving away from you in terms of voter support, it tells you that you need to really get on the ball to get your system in place for the long term. What this tells me is that you've got growing support. You all should continue to do the things that you're doing to keep people moving in that direction. This policy is a huge part of that. So, so this is a positive, and it's going into the policy makes a lot of sense. But this is also something over time that the board should continually be aware of in terms of not just how do we do on the last levy. It should always be how did we do over the last 20, 30 years and track that trend over time.
But if you look at the last 20 years, it's the middle of that chart on, and that trend would be decidedly different, right? If you look at 2006, which is right in the middle of there, the last 20 years, it's a very negative trend. But I think that the trend really depends on other dynamics in society as much as it does, our current thing. It's hard to say that.
It is.
35 years ago, we passed it, didn't pass
And-
a certain percent,
To that point, this community had always done a continuing levy. And in the last one, unfortunately, the message was more about it being permanent versus continuing, even though that's kind of what we always have done. And so we, the conversation was, hey, with the income tax, we want you to come back every 5 years and recalibrate and make sure that we're on the same page. And so, that, again, that was a lesson learned by the board, that it's gonna have to come back every 5 years to make sure that initially it was, let's prove the concept, but then the concept worked, but then we thought, okay, let's do a continuing, because the concept worked, but the sentiment was, no, come back and renew it every 5 years. So you'll see that right there.
Yeah, that CPT stands for continuing period of time.
Right.
So this, is, to your point, that was potentially one of the things. So one thing I forgot to mention, which I appreciate that you did, is one of the other strong parts of your tax system is that all of your taxes are continuing, so you don't have to continually go back repeatedly. Having one levy to go back for is very, very manageable. It still isn't optimum because theoretically, when we talk about balances, theoretically, if you're not able to renew that levy, then the 5-year forecast becomes a lot more dire. How much money is coming in from that income tax?
It's 20% of our total.
Yeah, so theoretically, when we get into what is a really sound system for measuring your fund balances, I'll tell you that a part of that is a reserve for not renewing that levy. Most treasurers do not have a reserve for not renewing the levy, but it is a good practice to have some percentage. It doesn't have to be 100%, but there should be some percentage of your reserves in the event that that levy is not renewed.
And David, I think it's also important to understand that a lot of those are continuing because we are above the 20 mil floor. So the previous boards, going back beyond anyone's tenure here, they understood that we are always going to be above the 20 mil floor and therefore be reduced. So we will always need that levy. So let's not create something where we have to go back literally every 6 months in an election cycle and renew something.
Yeah.
Let's get it, let's make sure it's continuing so that we don't have to keep going back because we're already going to have to go back every 3 to 5 years. So those are the types of conversations that I think are really valuable in the context of developing the tax policy.
So in session 4, I will put that question on the table, and that question is, to the extent you can get it passed, should each levy be a continuing, or, I mean, so knowing that the income tax, at least it would appear for that first attempt, was not it wasn't successful, was going to continue, but should you continue to try to do that for future levies?
We learned our lesson.
But you know, all in all, the system that you have in the terms work very, very, very well. So I'm going to switch gears real quick because I have 29 minutes to do an hour's worth of talking. All right, switching gears. It's really helpful. So it's one thing to kind of know who you are in a vacuum. This is who we are as a community. It's another when you start to look at yourself compared to your neighbors. I start with a very basic comparison of every school district to the neighbors around the school district. Even though as a school district you might be more like a school district in the Cincinnati area or the Cleveland area or even in some of the suburban parts of the Columbus area, people know the school districts that are around here. Their families might live in those particular districts. Their kids are absolutely competing against the schools in these districts. So I start with just who are your neighbors and how do you stack up next to your neighbors. So I picked 19 of your surrounding neighbors. I just stick a pin in Granville and then draw a circle and take a look at how the district stacks up. The purpose of this table is to this is a two-part conversation. Part one is when comparing the cost of your school district as a percent of a median family income to the districts that are around you, where do you come out? So that far right column, that represents the percentage of the median family's income that they're spending on their respective district that they live in. So northern local, the residents there are spending the least amount of their income on their school district. And I do not put this table together to make anyone look bad or good. It's just simply knowledge, like where do we fall? And in Walnut Township, their residents are spending the highest percentage of their income for their school district. So I took the most recent 2024 census data to look at the home values as published by the Census Bureau. I did the same for median family income, and you can see the range of values. I have a column in here that looks at home to income ratio. That's how much clear that someone is spending as a part of their income on their home value. The national average of 3 is considered to be the beginning of unsustainable or unaffordable. So as a community gets to 3 times, that's not a positive indicator. And you all are at 2.85, but you see Big Walnut's at 3.24. I think Northridge is at 3.18. The importance of that number is to really begin evaluating this question of how much more can we ask our residents to pay, understanding the overall cost of their housing. So it begins to factor into this process of what's a reasonable expectation for people to pay for things. Now, cutting to the chase, this is just one side of the equation. It's the cost side of the equation. It's how much people are paying for something. This does not tell you what they're getting in return for that cost. What value are these districts paying?
We're probably going to say the same thing.
Well, it would be interesting to see percentage of residential compared to commercial tax base for each of these districts as well.
Yeah, but that doesn't change how much you're paying for your district. So our second class, I will go into who's paying the taxes and the allocation.
Okay.
Your tax cost is higher because you are mostly residential, for
Right.
sure. But it doesn't change the fact that your residents are paying $6,600. So the reason for the cost is a separate conversation from
Yes.
the cost.
Yes.
Right.
Well, and my message has always been,
Yeah.
don't wait for the state. They're not going to come on a white horse.
Right. So
You're never going to get more money from the state of Ohio
Yeah.
being Granville, Ohio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our second session will really expose why your cost structure is the way
Right.
that it is. But the key here is understanding that people are paying for something regardless of why they have to. And the question is, so again, back to, I don't know if Northern Local, if their residents feel like they're getting the same value, as a resident in Granville. But I will show you the next page. So,
That last one, I'm surprised more of the local districts are not on what I would think the 20 mil floor, the 26 effective class one.
This
Why am
is,
I not
this
seeing
is
20?
all property taxes. So it includes operating taxes, bond millage, and permanent improvement taxes. So they may be at the 20 mil floor. But this is adding in all the other taxes as well. So this is every property tax, every property tax for the school district, that gets added.
Comparative districts, we have districts that we think of as in comparison, both in Franklin County, like around Bexley or whatever, as well as around the state that are more demographically similar. Would it be possible to get this guy, this is really great.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, yes, I can put together any comparison you want, but the reality is that a person living here may not necessarily know where Indian Hill is, or a Bexley. Yeah.
For the governance committee to kind of understand that and
Sure,
figure out.
So here's,
what's
what
worked
would
out
be
for us.
easier is I can tell you the districts that the state of Ohio say are most likely.
Yeah, those are some that we use, but we also use some in central Ohio that are ones that people's minds gravitate toward when they think about you living in central Ohio.
David, I can give you a list.
That'd be great.
If you tell me so I have the ability on the spot, I should have mentioned this right off the bat, to look at virtually every.
That's cool. Yeah, it'd be great if you could just send that list or whatever, add a couple, that'd be cool.
Let me just, for the fun of it.
Yeah.
So here's the list that the state says are the 20 districts that are most likely.
Yeah. That's cool.
All right, so Anthony, Wayne, Aurora, Avon Local, Bay Village, Big Walnut, Chagrin, you guys, Highland, Hudson, Indian Hill, Kinston, Little Miami, Madeira, Fairmont, New Albany, Oakwood, Revere, Springboro, Sugar Creek, and Wyoming. So I could do the exact same table.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
And add a couple.
But I think we need
Yeah.
to add the ones that
That we like, yeah.
So,
We can come up with a list there, kind of.
David, as you go back to your presentation there, I see the 2026 effective class rate for Granville is 32.64, but yet we had like 26.44. Where does that 32.64 come in the middle of the class one property tax rate?
That's what Thomas was asking about. So that includes bond and PI. The other slide was just the 20 mil floor amount. So there are levies that don't count towards the 20 mil floor.
Okay.
And
Sorry, I
his,
missed that.
that's okay, but his affordability
So yeah, back
calculation
in that
takes
6,
everything
yeah,
into
okay.
Yeah,
consideration.
it's,
Yeah.
I got you.
so it's,
Yep.
where's my mouse?
So for us, it's
Yeah.
bonds.
It's all of
the PI,
these
and
plus these,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So I'll put together a comparison list. The comparison list is going to be a part of your tax policy. And the question is, which districts do you feel like are most, what you want to use as the basis of comparison? I do this for the purposes of driving your thinking, because back to value, no matter who you're compared against, you're paying something. Your residents will be paying something, and maybe you're number 1 or maybe you're number 20. The question is, are you providing something for your residents that they feel like they're getting value for their payment to the district?
These schools are also the options, right? Like, people can select to live in these
Yeah.
areas, right? We're moving to like, Cincinnati suburbs,
Yeah.
not be an option, right?
Yeah.
Depending on their job and things like
Yeah.
that. So I do think this list is important, but
And my guess is the vast majority of your residents know more about the districts on the list up here than they might the other list that I showed. So it's just a matter of relativity. Like, what do we know our neighbor across the street. Not that they would. I mean, you guys in Heath are as far apart as you can possibly get as government, but they are next door. So it's sort of like, right next door. And it drives, here's a great example, this development, the choice between Heath schools and you guys. And it's like, okay, Why would the builder want to be in this district versus that district? Well, here's an interesting comparison. So back to the value proposition. You guys are number one in the performance index score and number one in your gap closing for 2025. If we were looking at overall performance, academic performance as a value proposition, I would say you're hitting it out of the park. Hands down. Not even room for discussion. I would gladly pay it, but are these the two things that your community look at as, is that valuable to them? And the reason I'm putting this on the table is when you're talking to someone, now again, my job is to make you think, when you're talking to someone who doesn't have a kid in the school and doesn't have a grandkid in the school, do they care that your performance index score is number one? And are they willing to continue to pay whatever that payment is for this result, if that is your value proposition? Is the answer that we're $6,600 a year for the median family solely for this reason? Or are there other reasons that we're that price and there's a value associated with it? When we get to the policy, I'm going to have you answer a question, and that is, do you feel comfortable saying that we intentionally deliver excellent ... excellent education, excellent services, excellent, or is excellent too much of a reach? Because excellence has a price tag associated with it. I have some clients that say, I don't want to say what we they don't want to be excellent. They want to be something. They don't want to describe exactly what they are. They just want to make sure that they can kind of get through the day from a financial perspective. But a really well thought out tax policy should make some type of a statement to the residents as to what you intend to give them for the price that they're paying. I was in a meeting 2 days ago. I had a board member say to me, David, what are some value propositions that a district might consider? And I'm like, you know what, let me put a slide in my presentation. These aren't all the possible value propositions, but I will point out, for the districts that perform well academically, typically the conclusions you can make is that not only does it create opportunities for successful children to go on, but it has a tendency to support values of property. So if you don't have kids in the school, at a minimum, you can at least say having great schools makes my home worth more, right? And a lot of people look to their home as their major investment. So it's a positive from that regard. More stable populations, better for career futures for kids, lowers crime, and supports safer neighborhoods. Let me provide for you some experiences. I work with districts in some communities that aren't always the greatest. And if I go to the gas station or I go to the grocery store, I have a tendency to run across school-age kids. And in some cases, I'm not always real comfortable about running into some of these school-age kids. When I go to your gas stations and your grocery store and your restaurants and I run into the school-age kids, they're always very respectful, polite, happy, interactive. I mean, and I don't live here. I travel through here all the time and I stop for different reasons. But I can tell you, as an outsider who interacts on occasion with people, your children, I can tell you there is a significant difference between the kids that go. I mean, am I right or wrong? Do you experience the same thing with your own kids here? So
We have eyes and ears all over the place.
an intangible value of academics and kind of overall experience is that the kids they just make the community a nicer place to go and to be. So that's a value. Some of my clients really look at the schools, not if they don't perform well academically, at least they can take pride in their athletic program or just general overall pride. But pride tends to be a key thing. Sadly enough, I have some school districts where safety and stewardship are key. That's a fancy word for saying we want to be a daycare for kids that don't have stable homes and they need a place to go during the day. And Brittany and I used to work together at Cincinnati. In some cases, a place where the kids can have something to eat. Because Cincinnati feeds many, many students, even on the weekends. So that may not be the case here, but it is a value proposition in other communities. And then lastly, that point where shared responsibility, shared benefit. where people are retired, they don't have kids in the school, but it is their responsibility to continue to do what their parents did for them and their grandparents did for their parents, and that's to pay their fair share to make sure that the district is a good place. So those are potential value propositions. Your homework assignment is our next meeting. I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to know what you all feel that your residents really see as the value of what they're paying for when they pay that property tax bill, when they pay their income tax. But check in with people, both retirees and people that are using the schools, because it will help us formulate. And ask a question like, do you feel like the quality, or do you feel like you're getting quality for the money? Not only is it just quantity if you're offering, I forget, do you still do International Baccalaureate?
No.
No. The quality, or do you have various music programs and bands, and so it isn't just the quantity of services and programs that you offer, but do they feel like the quality is excellent and that doesn't matter to them? Now some more comparative data in terms of looking at last operating levies. Your tax policy it's impossible to absolutely deliver on this promise, but it doesn't hurt to have a goal to go a certain number of years. This table shows you how long some of the districts in the region have gone without receiving new tax money to operate the school district. So this is solely for operations. And it's only money where voters approved new taxes. It doesn't mean that they weren't on the ballot and got shot down. It just means this is the last time they got money. I like to give you that table because you can see that the range is just a few years all the way out to 36 years. It's a pretty broad spectrum. It's helpful in a policy that you have some statement that says that while we understand that it is impossible to guarantee this, we'd like to go 15 years without. Once we put the right system in place, we'd like to go 15 years without coming back to you, or 20 years, or 30 years. So that's the table that shows.
It'd be interesting on that slide to see which of those districts are on the 20 health.
Right. Well, Brittany, so the two most common things that come across: 20 mil floor, income tax. The districts that have and pipeline.
Yeah.
So the districts that have those three things tend to be able to go the longest without taxes. Also, the ones that are able to go the longest tend to have. Not only are you mostly residential, you're also a smaller community. The other districts are much more geographically large and able to have more valuation in that model. The tax policy, though, it will ultimately have some description around how long you'd like to try it to go. Here's another one I'd like to provide just for perspective. People might look at your fund balances and go, oh, wow, they're doing great. They're just rolling in dough. This takes a quick snapshot of the districts in the area. I'm using 2024 on purpose. Once the state lawmakers started talking about capping fund balances, every school district in the state started moving money around a little bit so that it didn't show up in the general fund. This happened before most of the money started to get moved around a little bit. How many days of cash a district has on hand simply looks at your ability to operate, the amount of time you can operate without new revenue coming in. There are a host of benchmarks. Brittany probably has her benchmark. Typically, the old school benchmark was 60 to 90 days of cash is considered a reasonable amount of time. That is not the way I will approach it. So our next meeting, I'll show you an actual way where we quantify what is a reasonable balance. But when you look at this table, you can see there's a vast difference between a lot of districts and where you all come out. Your tax policy will incorporate Brittany's minimum and maximum. That will say we should never have anything less than 175 days and nothing more than 200 days, or 300. What is your rough maximum?
It's 90 to 160.
Okay, so once the policy will then go on to say, once you get to that higher number, once you're over the higher number, what do you do then? So what happens if you have $5 million more than the maximum? And we'll develop kind of a use.
$5 billion?
Yes, right. So do we use it on programming? Do we use it to pay down debt? Do we use it to, so we'll outline that. Because we're down to 5 minutes. Here's you all have a little bit of time. I want to just show you what is going on in this community. 2000, I've updated this since our meeting some time ago. The 2024 numbers have come out since then. Your population went from 12,500 in 2010 up to 15,357, according to the Census Bureau. So I just brought that data over. The number of people under 19 seems to be trending down. So that would suggest if your population is growing and the number of people under 19 are trending down, then you might have fewer people that are younger than there are older. Migration to the city, higher income people with not necessarily as many people in school. Your population 18 and over sort of supports that increase. Interesting trend, male versus female, happening in that regard. By the way, in some side research, would you be surprised to know that women are more likely to support school levies than men? Would that surprise you? No. It's true. Women are more likely to support school levies than men. So, so we got some advantages on that end. 60 and over, 12%, 16, look at that, 22.5%. Total households have grown.
And David, that's the housing stock that's been built.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not what's
We've been
being planned.
intentionally building for senior living.
Right.
So that makes total sense.
And I've used households on purpose. Households would include people that are related and unrelated, so that we can capture retirement facilities, things of that nature. But everything is on the uptrend. I want to jump out just because we're running tight on time. The households that are making $200,000 a year or more, from 13.5% up to almost 35% in 2024. To your point, older community, but the older community is, the incomes are significantly higher. So what's starting to happen is that you're attracting a lot of people here that are making a great deal of money in either approaching retirement or in retirement, and these are our Social Security and retirement numbers. Keep in mind that Social Security can be for disability and other purposes other than retirement. But in this community, I would have to guess it's probably largely retirement. 32% in 2024. For the fun of it, I broke that down and looked at what percentage of your voting age residents would be receiving Social Security. And as of 2024, 45% of your voting age residents are receiving Social Security. That's a pretty significant number. Now, our job is looking at that, potentially have to guess where we might be 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Now, this won't continue because at some point, I hate to say it, but the older folks, there's a cycle. There's something that happens on the back end of this. So, but anyhow, there you go. Our next meeting, we're going to go into who's paying the taxes, a breakdown to the commercial, residential, industrial. You're going to tell me what the value offerings are, go into our resources, go over our minimum maximum fund balance policy, talk about whether or not our current tax model should be adjusted, potentially, and then some of the ways that we can achieve some balance if you feel like more balance is needed. Okay.
Wow. Thank you so much.
I didn't think I could do it.
We need a motion.
I need a motion to adjourn.
Oh, sorry.
Take the roll, whatever you want.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf? Aye. Ms. Luan? Aye. Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.